Welcome to our show on international marketing, business, and strategy from here at Georgetown University. With us today is Professor Hjilmarson, who comes from Iceland, the University of Akureyri.
Correct.
And that's in the northern part, I understand.
Yes.
Not the southern part like Reykjavik and other places like that. Professor Hjilmarson is an expert in economics, in international business. He's worked with the World Bank and done a lot of international exploration and analysis. And he's here today to talk with us about the financial conditions in Iceland, what happened in Iceland in 2007 and 2008 when there were all these great financial problems, how were they addressed, how were they fixed or not, and where are we today? That's sort of the overview. So, yes. Welcome. Thank you for coming to Georgetown University.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
I'm delighted we have a man of your expertise here, and thank you for sharing your analyses and thoughts with us. So let's start right in the medias res, so to say. In 2007, 2008, Iceland had hit the headlines in terms of financial conditions, international financial problems. Start out by telling us, where is Iceland? How large is it? And what's the population? And then tell us about what were the problems, or what was that problem?
Now, Iceland is a small country in Northern Europe, about 300,000 people, 1,000 of the United States. So we are a small country. We are not part of the European Union, but we are part of the European economic area, so we are well integrated. Now, what went wrong in Iceland is that we had a banking system that was in 2003 privatized, and then expanded very rapidly and went out of control. And now the government didn't react properly to this crisis. The government treated the crisis in Iceland as a PR problem, didn't take appropriate action, and we also got experts from outside that told us that everything was fine, but in the end the whole system collapsed. I think the Icelandic economy is now recovering. We have a reasonable growth rate, and our unemployment is very low compared with the EU. We have something like 4% unemployment. This is only 1/3 of what the EU has, and our growth is like 3%. Why is our growth not higher than that? That is because we are part of the European Economic Area. EU is not growing at all today. It is like a non-growth area, so that is our problem.
Well, tell me in terms of how did you discover that there was a problem? What gave it away?
What people were concerned about, many experts were concerned about, is that the banking system had become 10 times the size of the economy. And this was, many people say that this is not viable business model or banking model to have a banking system 10 times the size of the economy. Now, there are countries that have large banking systems, but what went wrong with the Financial Supervisory Authority in Iceland did not grow in human capacity to deal with this crisis. It didn't grow in proportion to the banking system, and the central bank didn't have reserves to deal with the problem. This is what went wrong. The government tried to assemble foreign assistance to help the bank to increase the reserves, but it was not successful. Major foreign central banks totally refused to cooperate with Iceland before the crisis, and the banks resulted then in the fall of the banks.
But in listening to you, it almost sounds like the government was successful in spite of itself. We were lucky, you were lucky, that the government could not implement its plans of attracting a lot of money, yes, because then you'd still be deep in the hole.
Exactly. I think we were lucky before the crisis that all these major central banks said no, did not want to rescue Iceland. It was very important. I mean, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve all said no. I think they said no after looking at this very, very carefully, because these are friendly. I mean, at least we have a long-standing history of friendly relationship with the United States. We had a defense force from the United States for many years. We have always counted on the United States. I think that the central bank, the Federal Reserve, decided not to rescue Iceland because it was impossible, and probably decided, and along with the European Central Bank and the Bank of England, that it would be better to let the banking system fall, because otherwise the costs of rescuing the banks would have fallen on the Icelandic citizens, taxpayers, and this would not have been good. I mean,
So hang on for a moment.
Yeah.
We have a situation where the Icelandic kroner, is it?
Yes.
Was sharply devalued.
Yes.
Where the Icelandic economy shrunk significantly. How did all this affect the individual Icelander?
We had sharp depreciation that followed by strong export-led growth. This is not much unlike, we had a crisis in Sweden and Finland in the early 1990s. They had a sharp depreciation, like we followed by export-led growth. We did this. This affected people, of course. We call it balance sheet effects, as you know, is that people borrowed in foreign currency, had income in local currency. So many people...
So give me an example. What currency would they borrow in, and why would they borrow
at
all?
Yeah, it's a good question. They could borrow, for example, in yen or in US dollar and borrow at much lower interest rates, paying lower interest payments. That would be the benefit. But of course the risk is, as you learn in Finance 101, the risk is that the depreciation. People were counting on the Icelandic krona to remain strong. When the krona sharply fell, people's debts sharply increased. In many cases, people are basically paying in local currency, but the debts have risen sharply. So this is a problem for the individual and corporate. But what has been done is that debts have been forgiven, and banks are being taxed now to give back to people.
But does it basically mean if you bought a car with Japanese yen, and then the kroner was sharply devalued, maybe your cost of that car doubled?
Yes, exactly.
And that's of course tragic if you're sort of a regular bread earner.
Yes.
Because you don't earn double. Now, if you had been a member of the Eurozone, financially, would you have been able to use the same tools of depreciation?
No, that is a good question. I mean, for example, Ireland is an example of a country that was in the Eurozone that was hit very hard by the crisis. They were not able to depreciate, and what they did is that they basically gave sovereign guarantee of all the debts of the banks in the country, and they are now in a much more difficult situation than we are. Another example is Latvia, that had committed itself to become part of the Eurozone and take the euro, and kept fixed exchange rate at very high human costs. We were able to avoid this very high human costs. We have reasonably high growth, very low unemployment. We have balance sheet problems, but these are being resolved gradually. It takes a few years to do that, but I think this is a much better model in human terms and for long-term growth than having debts that are totally unsustainable.
So will Iceland pay back all its debts?
Iceland, we have been taken to court by, first of all, the Netherlands and the UK asked us to, supported by the EU, to take full sovereign guarantee over all the debts. Iceland said no to that. We have 2 national referendums on this, when the government had reached a settlement. Nation said no twice. Basically what we are going to do is to pay the basic insurance, which is according to EU regulation. We'll pay that back. But there
Which is sort of the 250,000.
The EU regulation at the time was like 20,000 euros per account.
Oh.
So and that is what we will honor. But the thing is that the banks are being liquidated and the returns are much higher than people thought in the beginning.
Will Iceland still be able to attract investment money?
We are attracting investment money in various areas. For example, on clean energy. For example, we are still able to produce electricity at a very low cost. And now these countries like the Netherlands and the UK are coming to Iceland asking us to have a cable to Europe to sell them electricity. So we are getting investment.
Great. So in other words, it's much better than it could have been.
I think that we, in many ways, as it looks now, I mean, we know that things can change quickly, but I think the situation is much better than we would have hoped for.
Professor Hjilmarson from Iceland, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your presence.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you very much.